Right. Alright. Hi guys. So, as most of you probably know, I recorded a video with Thorn about North, which was related to an article that I had written, and in preparation for the article, I had kind of stripped from Michael Luxion from Player-Based ILO a bunch of statistics, and I didn't get to mention most of them in our conversation, so I was thinking that I might want to make a video to sort of note some of the interesting things that I found in this giant bank of data, because otherwise it's just wasted on me and Michael and no one else. Alright, so it's filtered in a variety of ways. We have just online and LAN stuff here. We have just LAN divided by lineup, and as you can see, we have it divided by T and CT side. We have first kill percentage, which is of note. We have win percentage, which is also of note for the team in general. If we go more towards here, we have average damage per round. We have net damage, plus minus if you really care about that. And then we have, first kill percentage and stuff like that. But anyway, here we have all gun rounds. By the way, this is very important. I don't normally care very much about eco rounds and stuff like that, although I do like filtering between gun rounds and compare them to the regular rounds just to see who might be benefiting from a lot of eco frags. So then we have this, we have against top competition, but the sample size is weird here because of the way that Michael denoted tier 2. It counted out epicenter and other things. So, and then we have here a comparative. So it's difficult to know how much your stats are going to go down when you're taking into account only the top teams, because obviously they're supposed to be worse. You're playing against better teams, so even Astralis' numbers are presumably worse. So I wanted to see what they looked like. What was a normal plus minus, for example, or what was a normal net damage, especially to have when you're in your lineup. And also, you put a bunch of lineups. So what we're really interested in here is the device lineup. And as you can see, it's quite shocking sometimes. What we don't normally take into account is all the discrepancy that there is statistically with your T side. So you can see, obviously, in gun rounds, they're minus 25. It's pretty bad. I think that would be Glaive. But there's only one person that's over, or in the case of Astralis, there's only one person that's even above minus 10, which would be Zipex. But there's a lot of very interesting information here. For example, first kill percentage. It's quite startling that against top teams it's so low for Glaive, because you'd think it'd be higher than that considering how aggressive he can play on maps like Train on T side. But in any case, so you give a paid and accurate picture here. I think 12% against Kirby is a pretty large sample size of 98 gun rounds. 12%, that's good. 9%, that's pretty good. 8%, that's pretty good. 0.5% is not terrible. And, you'd have to look into specifically what Kirby and Glaive do in these situations to see whether that's good or bad. In the case of Glaive, that's interesting. And actually, as it turns out, by the way, it isn't Glaive that has the minus 25 net damage. It's actually Dupree. So that's quite interesting. As you can see, his ADR is 62. His average damage taken is 88, which is the highest on the team. So he has the lowest ADR and the highest ADT. So if this is not a case, it's more interesting with net damage. It isn't a case of playing passive, playing aggressive, because obviously your ADR is going to be impacted by how much you're getting involved in the round. And the players who play more passive, you have a very aggressive team, are probably going to get fewer kills, unless your team is very good in late round situations. So anyway, interesting stuff here from Dupree. I haven't looked into Astralis very much specifically, So I don't know why this is the case. You'd have to go in and watch their games against those top teams and see how he played. Anyway, so here's the real stuff. So it says Tier 1 and Tier 2 here, but considering the fact that North haven't played very many Tier 2 lands, this is there to include Epicenter and Blast. But it's also here to... it also includes DreamHack Montreal, rather. So what do we see here? So we have the Valde lineup here. We don't have the Magic lineup for comparison, while we do in the land setup. But what's the first thing we see? Well, the first thing we see is that in the CT side, North have a 38% win rate on gun rounds against top teams. On CT side, that's extremely low. If you go back to North in general, you'd see that in all lands for the Magic lineup, it was at 54%, 56% against these top teams. Well, what about Astralis? Well, Astralis actually at 57% on their CT gun rounds, so that's a pretty high percentage, above average. I think if I'm not mistaken, the average is around 54 to 56. So this is about what you would expect, and in general, and considering the fact that this is against top teams, this is an excellent stat. So you see that actually the performance that you have for Astralis doesn't dip very much against top teams, but North goes down by about 20 points here. So that's actually a shocking difference, 18 points to be exact. That's a shocking difference. So obviously, immediately you see a massive difference in the T side gun rate, in the CT side gun round win rate. Against on the T side, it's not as pronounced of a difference. Normally they oscillate in the 51% range. That's pretty high. That's a very good T side. But you see even against their with their old lineup, they were on 47%. So it's not a massive dip. That's a 6% dip. I think that's closer to what you would expect. In the case of Astralis, by the way, they're at 46%. And so here, obviously, it's worse. They're obviously a worse team than Astralis is, but it's not a giant dip. But it's still significant. So what else is interesting here? Well, if you compare all rounds and gun rounds, you see that there's actually not a marked difference. They're not the kind of team that, maybe like FaZe, that gets a lot of pistol rounds and stuff like that. Their average win rate is lower on any other, and all rounds considered, than it is on their CTs or on their gun rounds. So that tells you that they struggle in anti-ecos, and they struggle in eco rounds. They don't win them very much, and they're not, especially obviously notoriously did very poorly in pistols later in time. But they're bad. They're bad against top teams. This is what this tells you. They're especially bad on the CT side, but they're bad against top teams in both cases. So one of the things I'd like to see is I like to compare the first kill percentage that these players get. On CT side, you can see Config is by far the most prolific player when it comes to first kill percentage. He gets a first kill in about 15% of the rounds, which is huge. You'd expect it to be around 10%, maybe 12% per player on CT side, because obviously CT side gets more first kills. But still, that's a very high number, especially for Config, who has played less aggressive, though he does play positions like Catwalk on Mirage, and so that will help him get first kills against teams, especially since North really like to do the mid push. But Valde 9.5%. That's pretty high, and it's just decent all round. I don't know how much it would add. I wish I had my notes with me, because I had done the math on how much this adds, but it looks like it adds up to a decent amount of first kills. Nothing tragically bad, though I don't have the average for what this would look like, but it looks like it's about 50%. If I'm wrong, let me know. Now, here's an interesting factor. So, if you go to first kill percentage on the T side, it's very useful to go back to the stat filter against all teams, because here you have MSL at 18% on T side, which is massive, and AZ on 14%, which is still very significant. And it's very strange that would be the case. Config here is on 4%, and Cajun B's on 2% as your opper. This is not what you want to see at all. If you remember, Device on T side stands at about 8%, and Device is not the most aggressive opper, so Cajun B at 2% really struggling. So let's see what the first kill percentage looks like on their T side against in general. So if you go here in gun rounds, you'll see that MSL is at 14%. Yeah, so that's about the same. It's a little higher at 18% against all teams. So you can see MSL actually doesn't struggle at getting first kills more so than he does that. More so than against top teams. He's actually still very strong. In fact, he's stronger. Obviously, it might be a bit of noise that he's at 18%, which is incredible. But what's interesting here is that Ace is actually at 7%. And that's very strange because, you know, AZ doesn't play a particularly aggressive T side anymore. He'll play a position like Palace, something like that. And so it's strange that he's so high on the other end. We see that that's not normal. And so I haven't noticed any different usage in the way that AZ is used, so we can assume that that is kind of noise, because the sample size, it's worth noting, the sample size here is not, it's 48, so there's, you know, just simply getting, you know, 3 or 4 kills, you know, in one really hot game, will significantly change your percentage when I'm talking about these numbers, so that's worth noting. The other one that's striking is that config is normally pretty high, at 9%. It's not nothing crazy, but, you know, he performs. And against top teams, it just hasn't worked for him. Now, part of this will be that you see it's at 4%. So part of this is because config. This includes tournaments like Blast and Epicenter, and you'll note that config was very, very poor at these tournaments, more so than usual. And so it makes sense that he's bad in this sphere because of that, when North were getting shelled. But still, that's not the source of optimism. Now let's go to damage deltas actually. So you see actually anytime that you have under -10 in gun rounds as T side is pretty good. So you see here that config is at -2, and everyone else is very bad. MSL, despite having a very strong first kill percentage, by the way, is a -25, which is very bad, as we saw with Dupree, and so that's pretty striking. That is not the source of optimism. Part of it is definitely that MSL puts himself in situations where he's very likely to die after he gets his first kill, if he gets his first kill. So, for example, in a connector push, he'll be the first one out of the smoke. So he's very likely to get opt, stuff like that. But, you know, you'd want more out of MSL in this situation for sure. But what suggests that he plays very aggressive is the 88 average damage per round, which is higher than anyone else on his team, and even very near to config, which obviously config is a very aggressive player. And so that kind of tells you that he's giving up. Some of that is due to the fact that he's an IGL and he's putting himself in disadvantageous positions. So still, MSL not great. You maybe want more. Let's see where Glaive is at actually in this department. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was at -15 or something like that. Yeah, -16. So you probably want more, and this is not even against top tier competition. Everyone else -15, except for Cajun B, who Cajun B is not very bad, actually. You'll note he takes the least damage out of anyone, doesn't get involved very much as a rifler, but as a opper, mostly covers positions to maintain map control. Someone like T-Stairs or something like this. Not particularly impressive numbers by anyone, by any means, except for config. -2.5 is pretty good, especially considering the fact that he has 20 more ADR than anyone else on this squad. Or except 17, I guess, when it comes to Cajun B. So this is very impressive. You can tell that config, even though his damage delta is significantly lower, it's not because he's taken less damage. In fact, he's taken more damage than most of his teammates. Really, in terms of damage done, config is vastly superior than his teammates on T side, or so the numbers would suggest. And I'd say that's even more the case with the eye test, where it looks like a lot of times North don't have anything going on unless they find success with they find success with config. So another thing of interest I thought was Cajun B net damage on CT side at 18. If we go against top teams on CT side, you'll find that Cajun B is at -7. You'll note this is CT side, right? So that difference, it's about a 20-point difference. That's tragic. That will ruin your team. That means that your opera is having a net negative impact in terms of damage dealt on your CT side. And the only time I see something like that is like Skadoodle on Mirage or something like that, where someone plays super passive and doesn't get anything done. So Cajun B very, very weak when it comes to these top teams, and that's something that I mentioned on Thorn's show. Is that I mentioned it for T side, but it applies to CT side even more. Is when you're facing these teams that know how to use utility and that know how to outduel you within AWP, Cajun B has no way of finding advantages. He's completely ineffective, in my opinion, at finding picks. As you can see, his first kill percentage is 9% on CT side, which is very low for an opera on CT side. And he just doesn't. He's not particularly good in clutches. He's not very good at finding first kills. He's not gonna get creative and find ways to eke out kills during an execute, kind of thrive in chaos. He's not that kind of player, and so he really struggles against top teams. He's one of the biggest differences in terms of top teams versus or all teams. Another difference: MSL -1.4 on T side, or on CT side rather. That's not good. Let's see, he's at 7, so clearly a less acute difference when it comes to that. But still, MSL has a dip in performance. This one would be AZ. So AZ, it's interesting. Sorry, I have a Discord message, some difference. AZ has a massive dip in CT side performance. Just like Cajun B, he has about 20-point dip, which is tragic. And you can see his ADR. You know, his average damage taken is the highest with MSL, but he's still very weak when it comes to sorry, the Discord message might be over. All right, ignore that. Anyway, so you can see his ADR is quite low. The difference between him and MSL here is that MSL has a 79 ADR on CT side, which is actually strong. AZ, on the other hand, has a very low CT rating. And if someone wants to leave me a comment or make a video about this, I'd love to know why that is, because I've watched a lot of North, and I've never found him to be particularly ineffective on CT side. I haven't really noticed him on CT side, to be honest, and maybe that's why. But I see no reason for him to be so weak, especially because of what we're going to see with AZ on T side, with his first kill percentage being dramatically increased. So it doesn't seem like, to me, he's unable or just doesn't have the aim to keep up or anything like that. I think he's a good player, so it's not clear to me. And obviously his first kill percentage isn't great, but you know, a strange dip in performance from him. Config at 6, normally at 7. So config is actually, this is fun. Config is not a particularly good CT side player. He's okay. He's pretty good, but he really thrives on the T side. Most of his damage is on the T side. He actually has 10 more ADR on the T side than he does on the CT side. And here too, you know, he's pretty good. He's nothing crazy, but still a good CT side player. The one that's most impressive, actually, this will be interesting, is Valde, who has the highest ADR on the team by 10 points, or 9 points, and he's very good. He's really smart, and the thing that's interesting about him is that he's actually a side anchor on a lot of positions. For example, he'll play B Mirage, and you know, he'll anchor A site on Inferno with AZ. So it's an interesting player. I think that one of the reasons that this is so high, 88%, is because, one, he's a smart player and he knows how to use utility, and so he's very good at finding kills while people are executing on him, which is definitely a boon. But the second thing is that I think that he's really good at clutching, and so his if you're an anchor and you're stuck in, let's say, a 1v3 or something, and you're not saving, first of all, saving is not, you're not going to take any damage, so that's not going to impact your net damage. But his ADR is very low and is very high, and actually one of the things that Valde is very, very good at, and this is something I stressed in my article, he's really good at clutching. He's a really good clutcher, and that makes a big difference. That's very important when you're a side anchor, and so very effective on the CT side, but you'll see not effective on the T side, not nearly as effective, about average in terms of his team against top teams. Now, if you look at him against everyone else, Valde's still just as strong, 88 ADR, slightly more damage taken, but that's all good. And 13.5 net damage, that's very strong, especially relative to his teammates, where Config is the only one that's above board, but, he's really the strongest CT player for this team. But through the eye test as well, by the way, he's the one that'll save them, he's the one that'll win them rounds on CT side. So that's an interesting boon that Valde has, I think. You see on the CT side, not nearly as effective again, very low ADR. AZ is at 70, which is quite strong, by the way. Valde's going real strong. He's actually better against top teams on the T side than he is against weaker teams, at least in terms of net damage. If I'm not mistaken, he had a slightly higher ADR, but, about as strong. So Config, very, very strong player against these top teams, which is interesting. But Valde, not so much. He's about the same, especially relative to his teammates. Not very good. He's a lurker, but he's not the kind of lurker that'll find a lot of frags. He'll get in clutches. He's pretty good at clutches, but, the thing with Valde as a lurker is that he can be, and this might not be his fault, but he can be pretty predictable. At times, he can get countered, and this goes for all of North. But since he's the lurker, he'll get stuck in these positions a lot. Not excellent, not particularly good at getting first kills either. It's not his job as a lurker, but he's not very good. He doesn't have very good flick first one bullet taps aim. So he's not particularly good at that, but he's not the worst. You see, Cajun B is much worse, and MSL obviously is worse. So it's interesting. The breaking point seems to be AZ on CT side, and on Cajun B on T side. Now there are bigger problems in this for North. I think the most pressing of which is how predictable they are on T side, and I think that this will affect severely the way that this player's ADR, Valde, but I don't think it explains Cajun B's, and this I talked about at length with Thorn, so you should check out that video if you are interested in this. But Cajun B has never been able to find a way to be effective on T side as an opera or as a rifler. As a rifler, he's not great. He's okay. And as an opera, he's very bad. In fact, when I interviewed MSL told me that he struggles to find a way to use his operas on the T side and on the CT side because he's never used an opera in any of his previous teams before Cajun B. Think back to the days of Dignitas, where he was stuck using Kirby as an opera. Most of the time he would just run 5 rifles. So this might be a problem that extends beyond Cajun B, but Cajun B is an unacceptable 51 ADR. That's very bad, very weak. And so those are kind of interesting things, I don't know if I have anything more to talk about. I isolated for these tournaments here, which I thought were the point where they were best after they went through the honeymoon phase. But yeah, that about clears it up. So the things that are most worthy of note is how strong Valde is on CT side, how weak Cajun B is on both sides against top teams relative to how he is against lower tier teams, and how actually Cajun B is relatively bad or quite bad on T side in any way. Whether that's his fault or MSL's fault is not clear. Another thing to note is how strong MSL is in that first kill percentage range, and yet how bad he is in terms of damage taken. That's very interesting. I've posited an explanation for that, but I think that's interesting. Another thing that actually I wouldn't have thought of is how good Valde is on CT side and how not great he is on T side. But I wouldn't have taken Valda to be their best CT side player. I probably would have said it, if I had to guess, probably Config, just because he's the best player, or maybe Jimenez, but I wouldn't have thought he was, leaps and bounds better than anyone else on his team on CT side, but he definitely is, and it's not because of roles, I don't think. So definitely a strong performer for this team, and I think that these statistics do quite reinforce my idea to find a more mechanically skilled op, or at least to get more firepower on the CT side, because as we can see, it is the CT side at 38% that really crushes this team in clutches and in these late round situations, because they're not particularly bad at bleeding out the first kill. They're fine. They really struggle against teams like FaZe, G2, Astralis, and SK. So I think that this gives us an idea of what North need, which is more firepower, smart and skilled players. And I think that the easiest way to do that is with Cajun B. But I just thought that was interesting. I hope that if you want to see more stats and stuff like that, let me know. I can give them to you. If you found something in here that I kind of breezed over or you're more interested in, let me know in the comments. I'll pull out the thing and send you a screenshot of it, or just tell you if it's simple, straight up. But I hope that you found this interested. I hope I was more or less articulated, because this was kind of off-the-cuff kind of stuff. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Follow me on Twitter if you want to talk to me, or if you're interested in some dank memes and pretty much nothing else. If you want to contact me, Twitter is the best place. If not, subscribe. I might make more videos in the future, just whenever I feel like it, really. It's a better way for me to communicate while I am burdened with hundreds of pages of readings. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and I hope you have a lovely evening.